Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you so much. Thank you and welcome to the Churchill Club. Tonight we have a power-packed discussion in store about engineering great products and customer experience. We have with us Catherine Courage, SVP Customer Experience at Citrix. We have Steve Johnson, VP of User Experience at LinkedIn. We have Frederik, Head of Innovation and Creativity Programs at Google. Larry Tesler, Chief Experience Officer at Mine. And Charles Warren, SVP of Product Design at Salesforce.com. And of course, our moderator, Jim Walsh, CTO of GlobalLogic. Thank you all so much for being here.
Great.
Our thanks to GlobalLogic, in particular Shane Brentham and Anjali Agrawal for their partnership and for making this program possible. Thank you so much. And we also want to thank Weber Shandwick, especially Natasha Woods, for their partnership and for sponsoring our internet access tonight. Thank you. For our new guests in the audience, a brief introduction to Churchill Club, a nonprofit devoted to innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. It began in Silicon Valley in 1985 as a forum where important people say important things at the nexus of business and technology and also policy. And since then, the club's scope has broadened, just as the expanding role and impact of technology itself on so many aspects of our world. We convene up to 40 programs every year to really try to advance collective thinking and insights around things like leadership, trends, implications of those trends, and in particular opportunities. And we encourage our speakers to say something that matters and to build on what's already been discussed out there rather than repeating it. And we do certainly welcome you to join and participate and remain close to the extraordinary conversations that we are igniting here on a regular basis. We have an incredible lineup of programs coming up. Next week on April 22nd, Reinventing the Future of Work with the absolutely brilliant Neil Jacobstein. Then on May 19, we have even more brilliance with LinkedIn founder and Greylock partner Reid Hoffman in conversation with MIT Media Lab director Joey Ito. And on May 29, it's the top 10 tech trends, which is one of our most popular events each year, always with an all-star cast. So we hope that you'll join us for these programs and just keep an eye on what's coming up as well. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you'll find other Twitter codes in your printed program. We'll now introduce our moderator, Jim Walsh, who will ask the speakers to introduce themselves. Jim is CTO of GlobalLogic. He has about 3 decades of software product development and more than 300 product releases under his belt. And he has also had the opportunity to play leadership roles at an impressive set of companies over the years, from GlobalLogic to Rational, Next, Apple, Epiphany, Cordiant. Today, he's providing technical leadership to a staff of over 6,000 engineers at GlobalLogic. And we look forward to the conversation that he will lead for us tonight. Please welcome Jim Walsh.
Thank you very much, Karen. Well, thank you. It's great to see the auditorium full. Before we get started, I'd like to just show a brief show of hands. How many of you consider yourself hardcore software designers? How many? You didn't? Okay. How many of yourself consider yourself business people, engineering people, not hardcore software? Okay. So 10 years ago, we would not have this audience for this topic. Okay. The topic today is engineering great products and customer experience, trends and strategies. 10 years ago, and I've been in the software world 30 years, 10 years ago, great was not really in the vocabulary. The people who were pushing for great were the mavericks, the outsiders, right? But I think what has changed things is that in the last 10 years, we've seen the phenomenal success of companies like Apple and like Google that are focused on great. You know, 10 years ago, I looked it up, Apple had a $10 billion market cap, right? Today they have a $450 billion market cap, and they crossed $500 billion along the way there, right? Google has grown by a factor of 20 since its IPO. So, so I think the reason that this topic attracts a lot of interest now is that we've all seen the business value of great. It's not just a philosophy anymore. It's not just something insane as in insanely great. This is something that has practical business benefit to produce great products. So the tide has really turned. But and I think all of us here want to start to learn, or some of us are already producing great products, but we want to learn to do it consistently, repeatably. And we've all found, through these people who've tried it, us who have tried it, that there are challenges along the way. One of the most significant ones is there's a complete cultural difference between the people who design software and the people who implement software. And we learned that ourselves a couple of years ago. We were strongly reminded of that when we acquired a design firm. That team has a lot of body art, for example. You know, they ride to the work on bicycles. They you know, have exotically designed hair. I encountered some of that when I was at Apple. You know, they offered to give me a makeover when we acquired them, more trendy clothing. But it's a complete cultural mismatch, the kind of heads down, hardcore engineering staff. So that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. And then we also want to explore what's the secret sauce, right, that makes designers, engineers work together to produce wonderful products. And we have a fantastic panel today. Larry and I are kind of holding down the fort on the engineering side of things. I'm a hardcore engineer myself. Larry is about half and half. And everybody else comes more from the design side of the house. So we're going to focus primarily on design, how it works with engineering, but we'll also talk a little bit about the engineering side as well. And I'd like to go down the line of the panel and have people just briefly introduce themselves, and then I'll direct a question in each of the panels so you can get to know them better, and then we'll kind of open it up to a more free-form discussion. So actually, Larry, I'd like to give you the first question. That as somebody who's been on both sides of the house here, what cultural challenges do you find in having engineers and designers productively work together? And what have you learned along the way to make that happen?
The solution is to get each side to give a little bit and try to see the world a little bit like the other one sees it. And that means that the designer needs to understand the logic behind the architecture and the system that's being built before they try to change the way it works and looks. And the engineering people need to take a break from looking at everything as just totally logical and become a little more playful and that sort of thing. Keep my answer short.
Anybody else want to chime in on that? We'll come back to it. But Catherine, who do you see the dynamics really change? We talk about design not even having a seat at the table 10 years ago. I mean, what do you see now? Or who are the key stakeholders in delivering great products, and how do they interact?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. 10 years ago, actually it was 15 years ago, I first moved to Silicon Valley, and design was at the place where you had to convince companies that this was important. Please hire me. I can make a difference. I can add value. And we're in a very different place now where we're seen as a critical function at the table. And now that we're there and we're in leadership roles, like many of the people on this panel here represent, we need to learn to collaborate really well with engineering and product management. And you know, we adopt the philosophy of 3 in a box. I think that's really, really important. And it goes back to Larry's point of having shared perspective. But I also think it's having a healthy tension and pushing one another in different ways, because we're all coming to the table with that slightly diverse and different perspective. And when everybody has a shared and common ground of delivering something great that our customers are going to love, then I think that healthy tension and working together to find the balance between business, build, and design really results in the best products.
Great. Steve, so I watched some of your fantastic YouTube blogs, which I strongly encourage anyone with an interest in design to take a look at yours too, and actually all of yours. But Steve in particular, one of the quotes you gave really stood out for me, which is quality is not a feature, it's a behavior,
yeah.
Right? And what one of the challenges I've had throughout my career as somebody who's been a strong advocate for quality and design and things like that is exactly what Catherine said, is how do you get people to take it seriously, right? I mean, how do you get people to say, you know, this is not a nice to have, this is essential. And also, how do you balance it against a famous quote from Steve Jobs, who says, real artists ship, right?
I hear that a lot. So I think that when it comes to quality specifically, you don't cut quality. You don't cut behaviors. You normally cut features. And you don't get people that create that triangle that says speed to market, feature, and quality, choose two. If you make something inherent and you make it a part of people's DNA, they won't go against it. As far as Steve's comment, I think that Apple shipped minimal quality product, not minimal viable product. Minimal viable product meant, what can we just get out the door? Minimal quality product meant, what is the highest level of quality that we can produce within the amount of time that we have? And I think that some of the trade-offs weren't on quality, but they may have been on feature sets. The first iPhone went out the door without SMS, but they still released a minimal quality product that I think very many people in this room probably enjoy.
Yeah, we like to say minimum desirable product. Like, what's the polished core thing we can get out there?
And Charles, actually, that one of the things that we talked about was related to these lean principles, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the other challenges with getting people to buy into design, right, is design is, you know, these wild people coming up with these crazy ideas. It's kind of inherently wasteful, you know, because 98% of it is never going to see the light of day, right? Or maybe 90, or I don't know. But how do you reconcile that with lean, where you say you should never write a line of code that doesn't ship?
Yeah, I think I would also think about lean as like never put something out the world that you aren't really certain that somebody's going to use, right? That you've done a bunch of testing. I think it's super important, though, that as designers, we understand that we're going to leave a ton of stuff on the cutting room floor. If we're not being provocative enough, right? That's our job, right? Is to really provoke, like the 3/4 of you guys who you know, were in those other two categories. You can count on your designers to upset you about a kind of version of the future that you don't agree with, but maybe when you sleep on it for a couple of days, it'll help you see something new, right? So it's our job for us to be wasteful, hopefully not hard-earned time of a developer. We should husband that really carefully.
So you're saying the designers should take the fall. They should do the things that never see.
Yeah, we can help you kind of see different futures for the very cheap. You know, we can make like 10 different versions of your product in one afternoon, right? If we're good. So yeah.
And then we're going to come back to A/B testing in a little bit. But,
sure.
Yeah, I know that's a religious issue that should be really interesting. But Frederik, we talked a little bit about the role of people in all this, the role of people, the role of the environment. I mean, what kind of impact does, I mean, what do you do at Google that, that makes it so great?
I think it's an interesting point, yeah, that the environment actually influences how we think and how we feel. Like, just do the experiment yourself. If you go to a cinema or to a gym or to a church, you feel different in all those different places. And I strongly believe that we actually have to shape the buildings, and then the buildings shape us, which is a famous quote from a person you all should know. If not, you can Google it or Bing it or somehow find it. So if we shape buildings in a form and in a way that we have engineers and designers on the two sides, and we want to have them in conversations and work together, we have to actually specifically design the building in that way so that those conversations can happen. Because I strongly believe, and that's part of my role, is that if you bring three things together, which is people in a specific place with a program or a language they both speak, then actually magic can happen. So I think if we get those three things right, then you can actually bring different people together in a very special place and let them create magic, which is mostly represented in products and experiences.
Right. So you have these two really distinct cultures and mindsets. Number one, the highly creative mindset, which is producing all these different variants, and then you've got the engineering people who says say that's great, but I've got a release going out, at the end of the month, right? I got to nail it down, right? So, what kind of organizational structure do you have? Who's in charge? Who decides? Is it the designer that's in charge? We want to talk about, when we think about Apple, we talk about a design-led company, right? And I think Apple is probably the best example any of us. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you guys, but it's certainly the best example I can think of a creative design-led company. I mean, how do you organize to make successful design-led products come to market consistently? And I know Catherine and Stephen, you both had some thoughts about staff rotation and organization. Catherine, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think it goes back to what I was mentioning. It's really having those roles be peers of when you have product management, when you have engineering, when you have design as peers, equal players at the table, and really pushing one another very hard to create the best product possible. I think that is key. But another thing is really a culture. Culture is absolutely key. Your organization has to value great. And I come from an enterprise world, as does Charles. Yeah. And if you look at the enterprise world as a sweeping generalization, we're behind. Most enterprise experiences are not great. So to be in an environment where great is valued, that's one of the core things to really drive success. And having equality in those roles will help actually, you've got the culture actually deliver on the cultural values.
Well, how do you get... I have a very strong personal interest in this because, our company, we're services, right? So we deal with like 200 different clients at any given time. Some of them value great. Frankly, some of them do not, right? How do you get people interested in great? How do you sell the value of great? And we'll come back to the organization stuff because I definitely want to talk about that. But how do you sell it? I mean, anybody on the panel.
Well, I mean, one way you sell it is your app is right next to an unbelievably polished consumer app, right? And so the difference is very, very obvious, right? And so it's our goal. I got some colleagues here. We're going to bring sexy back to enterprise, right? We lost that mantle in 1984 with the famous Hal Riney Apple ad, and we're going to bring it back, right? I think that was the turning point, right?
Yeah, I think people are demanding it now.
Yeah.
Is the other thing. They're revolting against organizations that do not deliver great experiences. Yeah. And if you deliver software they don't want to use, they're going to go use something else. So companies are now realizing that the products they deploy internally are very, very important.
So Steve, how do you make it systematic?
Organizational management's the most important thing that I think that any of us can do. Anybody in this room, anybody sitting up here, et cetera. I think that in a lot of cases what will happen is that you'll hear people say things like, we want to think outside the box, we want to be creative. But then what happens is they want to take the identical organization that they used to have that wasn't thinking outside the box and somehow force feed that or go hire consultants. What I try to do is I try to think of myself as my job is to build an organization that can build creative products, which means every now and then I'll flip the org chart. We'll take a look at who reports to who, if that department still needs to exist, if we can just align it into one. Should we collapse into horizontals or verticals? And that level of change that makes people understand that they're responsible, they can globally optimize, not locally optimize, because they know that they're not going to be in one silo for too long. I think that that's probably one of the most important things that I think that we should all kind of consider. What's our org chart look like? Because in a lot of cases, people's products look like the org chart. You can tell who owns what on the page.
Yes. Yeah, Excel is a classic example of that, isn't it? Yeah.
You can tell their org chart.
Yeah, Charles, you were going to...
I completely agree with that. And back to the question of engineering, I think waterfall is coming back a little bit. Like, just give the design team some time to get things kind of sorted out, and then it's not a kick it over the wall thing because the engineers need to kind of be along for that ride, but putting some stuff in the oven, doing a bunch of kind of lean, quick feedback loops, and trying to close that gap between our assumptions about our user or the task we want them to do and what reality is can just make the products shine, right? And we're not. I think everyone should try the new LinkedIn Contacts app if you haven't. It's a great example of that. It's a really, really polished experience.
He's not plugging his own company, by the way.
Yeah.
That's it.
Right.
So it's okay to plug somebody else's
product.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going out on a limb asking this question a little bit, and don't answer it if you're not comfortable. Can, in your own organization or organizations that you know, can you put your foot down and say, we should not ship this, it sucks, to the CEO? You can.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's quite a political cost for me to do that, but yes.
So you just choose wisely. You don't play that card all the time.
No,
but when it matters,
an
you do.
expensive red card to pull, but
Absolutely.
And I haven't had to.
Okay, that's excellent, excellent. And then, so on a more mundane note, I've noticed a lot of passion among our own design team, and I wonder if it's universal, that designers appear to hate A/B testing, right? And engineers love A/B testing because it's quantitative, right? I mean, they can evolve toward a perfect UI nirvana. Myself, I'm kind of in the middle on this. I definitely see the value of the design, the inspiration, all that sort of stuff. But what do you guys think? What about A/B testing? Larry? Yeah.
Yeah. We had this syndrome a little bit at Amazon, which was very A/B test focused and had very underpowered usability testing program. And when I got there, 2001, I tried various things to turn it around. And the thing that helped the most, was an organizational change. Getting not only the A/B tests, but other analytics groups, and also market research under the same management as usability. And the rule was that if a product manager anywhere in the company wanted some research done, some experiment done, then they couldn't decide whether it was going to be focus group, a survey, a user test, an analytical exercise, an A/B test. They had to go to somebody from the group whose job was kind of the director, and that you walk into Walmart and they send you here or they send you there, and that person would listen to what their problem was, what question did they have, and what tools would be useful to solve that question. And it might not at all be the tools that the product manager walked in with, which was just the tool they knew best. And we didn't have to keep that organization for a long time. We had it for a year and a half or something. At that point, everybody got it.
Yeah,
What do you guys? Yeah.
We tend to ask more questions first, because normally when if somebody says we just want to A/B test it, one of the very first things we try to focus in on is, do you know who the user is? If you don't have a really clear understanding of who your member is, that's when you normally want to haphazardly shotgun things and see what sticks. If you know exactly who your user is, what's the demographic, what's the problem that you're trying to solve, and what are the things that they've seen that's actually been successful, you actually limit the A/B test, but then it comes down to certain flows. Another thing is that in a lot of cases, you're A/B testing features. You don't want features, you want experiences. Rarely do you A/B test in a global experience, so that's how we limit it. We still do some, we even do ABCD tests, but we always feel really, really, really good about, we know who this member is, we understand what they're trying to do, we're just not quite sure what path they want to take, because people use our products so differently.
Yeah, it's a tool in a toolbox, and it's just knowing when to use that tool and what its appropriate use case is.
Which is more to optimize something that you've already decided suits the user's needs. Okay, so it's a combination of inspiration and instrumented stuff. Is that what you're saying? Like button place? I mean, once you've designed the overall product to satisfy the
we don't. Well, so we don't A/B test button placement.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I try to get away from that level of incremental A/B testing, because then what you do is that you just A/B test the entire page constantly.
Yeah.
Right. It's global flows.
Yeah.
Okay. So who's our member? We have a young college student that's been out of school for the past 2 years.
Interesting.
They're currently hitting LinkedIn for the very first time. What type of content do we want to hit them with? How do we inspire them to use this tool? How do we show them value? There's a few ways that we're thinking, okay, let's push those 2 ways out and see what happens. Not A, is the orange button green, blue, yellow, or is it big or small like that? No.
Yeah, it's not the personalization. So Frederik, this is more of a philosophical question, right? But like I mentioned in the intro, that insanely great made no sense to most of the business community until Apple scored this enormous home run, 45-time growth in in market cap over a 10-year period, right? So now people have jumped on board, but does it really make business sense to exceed a customer's expectations, right, by a wide margin, to delight a customer? I mean, I understand we all want to do it because we're passionate about what we do. We want to make great software, but does it make business sense? And Google should know this. I mean, because you do lots of things that are really creative and off the wall that don't actually succeed because you're trying to make the next wonderful product, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a philosophical answer to that question.
Yeah, please.
But I try my best. So I think it's, building on your point, it's about setting up experiments really and testing things really quickly to learn actually from them. And if you learn that something is not successful, you want to basically stop it or make the team stop it themselves, ideally. And we learned that in the past with a lot of products. We actually really we're experimenting in a lot of fields and figured out what can we learn from those and integrated that in new products as well. But if you think about it, Google started off with just a simple white page and a search basically field. And it was designed specifically around the two principles, which were simplicity and usefulness. And those are still true for most of our products we design. We added one additional one, which is beauty. So when Larry stepped up as the CEO again, he was really focusing on putting the beauty piece also in place. And that's something really not easy to do, because if I show you two things, you might have different perceptions of what is beautiful and what's not so beautiful. So figuring that out, what's the missing piece about what is considered beautiful and what is not considered so beautiful is really something we're investing more and more time in. And we just announced today that we're going to focus heavily now on design around I/O, for example. We launched some interesting design minutes, which you can watch online from our 3 products, Google Glass, Maps, and Search, and how we actually approach design in those products. And I think it's really something exciting if you think about those 3 principles and how they work together. So we're excited about the future, I think. I don't know if that was a very philosophical answer to your question.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. And I got the flag that we're halfway through the Q&A period already, and we're just through the culture issues right now. There's a lot more that we want to get to. So I'm going to jump ahead here. We talked a little bit about the internal organization of the company, so it encourages innovation. We talked a little bit about developing the people, so it encourages innovation. What about those pesky people, the users, right? So how do you integrate them into your design process? How do you not so much respond to them, but anticipate what they want? I think we'd all agree that real innovation is going beyond what we talked a little bit about this with the A/B testing. You want to go beyond what the customer is asking for. How do you integrate users in the design process? Charles, maybe you can.
Oh, wow. It is central to what we do. So, I mean, just as an example, our kind of design goal right now is to enable all of you to run your business from your phone, right? What does that mean? It means something different to everyone in this room. So who then is the person that we're trying to enable with that capability first? For Salesforce, it's probably an outside sales rep. So that means that I need a team of designers that understand those people better than they understand maybe their teenage kids, right? So we have a team of extremely creative researchers who do all sorts of different kinds of interventions to get not just the designers, but the engineers and especially the product managers, who, for those of you who have that title in this room, again, be really humble about your model of the user, because I find that for some reason you guys have the biggest gap. You really are confident you know what they want and who they are, right? And if you can tie that behind your back, that confidence, you're going to get better results. So we do tons of stuff. I was just watching a video of my colleague Rick Boardman, who's a researcher, watching somebody log a client call on the highway in an SUV outside Dallas, this tile salesman, right? So I think it's super important that we make that call logging feature efficient just to save some lives, right? So
Yeah.
that's how we do it. And his camera's shaking a little because he's nervous.
So Catherine, I mean, how would you answer that? You know, that I think most of the time consumers don't know what to ask for. You know, they don't know what's possible.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely,
how do
absolutely.
you balance that?
One of the core values for us is really having deep customer empathy. And you used a word that I really like, a couple words actually, but one of them was anticipate. And if you know your customers incredibly well, you're going to be able to see the gaps and create products that anticipate their needs and ultimately empower them and delight them. And that's where you create real long-term loyalty. So for us, it's spending a lot of time out in the field with our customers. We're doing a lot of work around mobility now, so we are following the day in the life of people and understanding how they transition from one task to the next. And we know with mobile devices, people are inserting them in and out of their day. And we know that they're multitasking. We know that they're driving their car and they're checking their device. So for us to be out there and watching and observing this as opposed to asking for things that people can't even imagine, that's what's really key, and that's what makes us go, aha, I see where we can add value. We can make this task much easier for someone, or there's a solution that's not out there that we should be looking at because there's a big gap where we could be helping people.
Steve, what
Yeah, so in the 80s, if you had talked to people that were watching movies at home, how to make that experience better, they'd say create a faster rewind button. They would never think of Netflix. So I think that there's a combination, right? You ask people, they say, I want a faster rewind button, and then you try to throw, just some fun, and I liked Larry's term of playfulness, and then say, well, what if there was no rewind button, right? So you can hopefully try to jump a couple evolutionary cycles in saying, I understand what people want. Let me paint a picture of something that they've never seen before, but I understand their goal and their need. And if I can still hit that need and then exceed that expectation, I think that we're onto something.
Larry is my fellow kind of engineering person up here. I mean, not that you aren't engineers, but you're more design-oriented. What makes a great product from an engineering sense, not so much from a feature, function, design, user-facing perspective, but from a hardcore bits and bytes perspective?
Right, and that's a very good question because people always say in engineering, the great is the enemy of the good. And that really offends designers because, yeah, maybe it is, but when they go to war, who do you want to win? Yeah. So, but the thing is, they're talking about a different great and good. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a great experience for the user versus a just good experience for the user. Yeah. And I don't think many people would vote for the good if great was available.
Right.
But in engineering, when you say great engineering, it doesn't mean that. It means it doesn't break easily. It's not fragile. Yeah. And it is complete. And you don't get into paths in the code that don't go anywhere. Things don't hang. So a lot of it has to do with traditional technical quality when people say great in engineering.
And another way that I think about it too is if your architecture makes it easy to implement what these guys are most likely to ask for, it's a good architecture.
It's there's efficiency, performance, and there's also flexibility.
Right.
Adaptability, customizability. Make it easy, and that designers do appreciate.
Yeah.
Make it easy to change the user interface to run an experiment. That's a terrific thing to do.
Or like, at Next and Apple, you make it easy to do what Steve is going to ask for next. You're a big winner, right? And yeah. So kind of a little bit of a more pointed question, and I think you guys are the right ones to ask, is, if you look it up, 3 out of 4 startups fail. Right, meaning that they failed to recover their initial investment, right? And 95% of startups fail to meet their business plan. And every single one of these startups, somebody thought was a great idea, or they would not have invested in it, right? So I mean, what is the number one thing from a total user experience perspective that you can do to mitigate against failure when you've got what you think is a great idea? And Charles, can we start with you?
Sure. I mean, we run our product development team when we can, like a startup. And again, it's just those assumptions about the user model are what's going to kill your business, I think. There's a lot of other things that design doesn't do that can destroy your business too, or cause it to stop. But these days, there is the pendulum swinging in the way of science for desirability. This is something you can actually beat the risk out of your business plan by just really persistent, careful, creative, closing the gap between your mental model of what's desirable and what that actual user wants, right? And this, I think, is causing a revolution in our field, right? And boy, it's kind of free money lying on the table. And I don't understand why it's not how everyone works.
Frederik, I wanted to ask you about connected life. So, you know, we're talking a lot about connected automobiles, connected home, connected work, right? And a lot of people are starting to think it's not a connected car, it's part of your connected life, right? And I can see two visions of the future. One of them would drive me absolutely insane, where ads are pushed to you every time. You know, you sit behind the wheel, you sit, it's like, you know, the Minority Report sort of scenario where, you know, you're constantly being bombarded by information you don't want. And another one where you're being constantly assisted and aided in your life by, you know, unobtrusive technology, kind of like the Her movie that recently came out, you know? I mean, what do you see there as kind of the end game for technology? I mean, you must have thought about this. I mean, because Google is one of the chief offenders and also chief facilitators of you know, we Google something twice at dinner, my wife and I. So it's a connected part of our life. But anyway, what do you think? I mean, where are we moving?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find this question you asked Charles as well interesting. So I want to just briefly add to your point that sure. It's actually about not just thinking an idea and creating that startup over like 12 months or 18 months. It's about prototyping early to really learn fast. So the more you prototype your idea, and hopefully the faster you figure out if that's going to be successful or not. And I think that's really what helps you also to not get emotionally too attached to your startup or your idea if you actually fail fast. If you invest a lot of time and money over like 12 months or 18 months, you don't want somebody tell you it's not going to be successful, specifically your users, right. If they don't use your product. So I think that's kind of like somehow the key is kind of like not just think your idea, but actually build it really quickly to test it. Yeah. The connected world, yeah, it's an interesting topic. I'm quite optimistic about the future and where we headed. Altogether, like what we're going to do in the future. I think we specifically at Google, we move away from like searching in terms of like you actively have to look for something towards more like the assist and suggest model, so that we actually can predict what you want in the future to suggest you the right things. I think that's a really exciting path we're taking. You mentioned like cars and homes and a lot of places we are during our daily lives. I think we have a lot of opportunity to make the technology work for us and get out of the way, and do the hard stuff for us, so that we can actually focus on our lives. I think that's what we haven't done in the past with most of the technologies, is that they're in our ways. They're not taking the hardest tasks of our lives. They're actually providing more tasks and make it more difficult to live a life. I think what we want to do is actually try to remove the difficult parts of your life and solve that with technology, so that you can actually spend more time with your family, your friends, and do the important things in your life. So I'm super excited about that in the future, and we're going to have definitely some answers.
Can I
Yeah,
really pop
please.
in on the,
Yeah, please.
not the connected question, but Charles' question really fast. This is going to sound overly cliche, guys, but the reality is that the thing that makes a startup work, in my opinion, is talent. The most important thing every single person in this room is going to do, regardless if you're a manager or not, is hire somebody. It's the single most important thing. And if you concentrate on that, believing that that one individual has the possibility of 10xing your company or completely tanking it, if you take it that seriously, you'll do a really good job. I think an analogy, so bear with me here really fast. Marvel Comics recently launched their own studio, and their new movies are insanely perfect. And the reason why The Avengers was so good specifically was because they said, we said we're going to spare no expense with who we hire to play these roles. And it started with the Iron Man movie. They specifically said, we're going to get the single best actor in the world to play Iron Man, and they nailed it. And I think that that level of whoever we hire to represent this brand is going to be world-class is something that's now resonating with all of those films, and they're very different from past Marvel movies. Like, you can just feel it. You sit in there and go, hey, this is great. It's because of the cast. So when we're thinking about who we're going to hire, who we're going to bring into our home, and who's going to represent our brand, we should think of it at that level.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Just to add one point, you know, when we look at hiring, I think one of the most important philosophies we always look at is skill fit. Obviously, the person needs to be an A player, exceptional at their craft, whatever it may be. But the second part is culture fit. And culture is so key. I cannot underestimate. You know, there are times we'll have somebody come in and I look at their portfolio and I'm drooling because it is so beautiful, but they're arrogant or I see huge ego. And we just say, no. And it kills me, but we say no because culture is really important. And if you hire poisonous people or people who don't have this right skill fit, but they're really nice people, you know, you're just going to see things deteriorate quickly. And it's one of the most important things to scale design.
That's a super important point you both are making. And the design team can actually be the creators of your culture, right? Because since they have these powers to work on your product, they can also work on creating meaning and the emotional tenor of your business. A guy on my team helped us fabricate a bunch of, to Frederik's point, a bunch of signs, just beautifully milled, sort of Helvetica signs that made out of aluminum that say, simplify. And they're kind of ambient, and they're just around our office, and it reminds us what we're doing. Or just we up-leveled the swag at Salesforce massively. I wish I had one of my team's T-shirts on, right? So there's this other thing you can have your designers do, which will just make a more vibrant environment, make a more visually rich place to work, where you all want to come and kind of connect with the values of your company. So
you're absolutely right. I mean, we saw the same thing when we incorporated Method, and they started driving our look and feel, the colors of our office, the size of our cubicles. I mean, it just made an enormous difference in the way we interact.
Stationary.
Yeah. It's subtle. I mean, it's something that, from an engineering standpoint, you don't think. I mean, I don't think of those things, but it makes an enormous impact.
Once your working space is convenient and beautiful, it's embarrassing to make products that aren't.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And Larry, back to this kind of issue of ubiquitous connection to devices, right? I mean, you actually were the champion behind the cut, copy, and paste metaphor that when you were at Xerox PARC years ago, that all of us use every day. I mean, I can't imagine a more ubiquitous metaphor. I probably used it, 50 times today. So what's the secret for creating a viral metaphor? Do you see systems being close to life? I mean, obviously you got that from physical cut and copy. Does the system start imitating life? Does life start imitating the system? So we evolve to something that's kind of a mix of the two? I mean, how do we interact with our devices moving forward?
There's a part of interaction design that has to do with making things very efficient, being able to get things done in a small number of steps, and steps that don't take very long. It's a kind of one of the older aspects of the field based on human factors, lots of measurement and psychology, and that was really where cut, copy, and paste came from. You're able to move and copy things much quicker with fewer hand motions and so on than other ways. But and it's universally applied. even in places that it's kind of a stretch. But that still goes on, but the trend has been more and more that looking at the visual and the emotional aspects of design as opposed to just the very practical efficiency aspects. But I don't think people should completely forget the efficiency aspect.
Yeah.
It's still important.
It's the most important.
And something like iOS 7, for example, removed a lot of the real-world metaphors that were present in earlier versions. So is that a trend? I mean, are we evolving this new kind of culture that is only for online people?
One aspect of a design-centered world is that things go in and out of style.
Huh.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask about that, and that's a perfect setup for a question that I have had that's a bit off the wall about with design leading product development so strongly. Are we going to get to a point where there are fashion designers? I mean, obviously, and for example, you know, Johnny Ives is a name many people have heard of when we never heard of a software designer before. I mean, is there going to be the Ralph Lauren of the design field or something? Catherine, do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, is it going to be, are you guys going to become household names or your equivalents? I mean, is that what the future holds for design?
Let's hope. Let's hope. Yeah, but it was Apple that hired one of the senior women from Burberry. So we're seeing these lines really blur and cross. I mean, there is a lot of relevance.
Yeah, because people are integrating these products into their everyday life. And one more question before we take the final question, before we open it up for general Q&A, is we talked a little bit about connected life, but the biggest dichotomy a lot of us have is life at work versus our personal life, right? And you know, we have Salesforce here, we have Citrix here, we have, you know, LinkedIn here. LinkedIn kind of straddles both worlds. I mean, what trends do you see, Catherine, in that, and Charles as well? Yeah.
I think people want seamlessness. They want to be able to transition from one to the next very, very easily. And I just think work, it's become very blurred. There's not a clear line anymore between, you don't show up at an office at 9 a.m. and leave at 5 p.m. People are working all over the place physically, and they're very much intermingling their own personal life with things that are related to work, and it's sometimes simultaneously doing both of them. And this is a really fun space for us to work in because we're trying to give people that permission and that seamlessness, even in, you know, very high security areas like finance, healthcare, to have the ability and the freedom to work from anywhere. And also with teams splattered all over the globe. Now you've got this challenge of connecting people who are not in the same physical locations, not in the same time zones. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and we're doing some tremendous things to help people feel empowered.
Yeah, I mean, if you're running your business from your phone, it's a very good thing. It gives you this sort of 24/7 control. It also means that you're going to have to be mature about the amazing feature in iOS 7, which is do not disturb, right? Mm-hmm. Right, and I was just listening to NPR on the way down here, and knowing when actually the question your child is asking you is maybe more important than the quarterly numbers, right? And so I think it's super empowering, and I have no doubt that, you know, being able to run your business from your phone generally will give us sort of better mental health and happiness, but it means we have to adopt some new habits and sort of personal hygiene around connectedness. And I don't know if technology can actually do that for us, right? That meaning has to come from somewhere else.
Frederik, and what do you think is the next technology that's going to be enable better user experiences? That's going to, you know, get us more connected. Is it more push technology? Is it more? I mean, what? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think we have 300 different opinions here in the room, so I don't think that my opinion
I'd like to hear yours, though. Yeah, thank you.
So I think we see a lot of different, you know, developments, and I think we're at early stages with some products. We learn fast. So yeah, I don't have a probably a good answer for that.
Well, are there particular gaps that you see right now that companies could move to fill? What advice would you give the companies right now to explore, the people in the audience? What do you think is going to complement the existing ecosystem the most?
So building on Charles' point, I think what we see is that we just have a big responsibility as tech companies in general. We basically design products which influence people's lives. So we have to be very responsible in how we design those products. And you talk about the 24/7 online world. So if you have that world, we have to really understand how we can actually also educate users around using technology in a way, and what's most beneficial for users in that sense. So we really follow that mantra as well, focus on the user and all else will follow. And if you put that as a mantra out, you really see that this helps you to really understand what's making sense in terms of technologies you design, but also what's some trends in the future as well.
And in terms of specific technologies in mobile, we've seen higher and higher resolution screens, right? We've seen lenticular screens for 3D displays. There are people talking about integrating chemical sensors for smell. I mean, do you see any particular trends there, and any of you on the panel, that got you excited about what you can do? Yeah. Please,
Who saw the movie Her?
Yes.
Right. So I think there's a very optimistic kind of thing in that, which is the technology of attachment, right? Is very interesting, right? And we're heading in that direction. I don't know exactly what that means, but fascinating, right?
Attachment to your devices?
Attachment to something that's not human. Right, which we already have, but it's just much more nuanced than that. It's Spike Jonze's vision of the future.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I highly recommend it. It's a really optimistic and interesting view of the future, and also disturbing.
I'll take a quick stab at it. So, I'll take a page out of the Samsung ad, right? The next big thing is here, but it's just not talking to each other. I think the convergence is the next big thing. And what I mean by that is how many sensors are in this again? I can't remember.
It's a lot. Yeah.
But they're all not talking to each other. Yeah. And once we can open up those APIs and make it so that from a technology perspective, every single one of those sensors knows you, knows who you are, knows what you're into, knows what you like, what you don't like, and then it can start to anticipate and offer you up things that maybe you didn't know. But it's based on what it knows about you, and it learns. It becomes a companion. It's back to her.
Yeah.
Good.
As someone, I'll just add one final point. As someone who's kind of outside of work, very into health and wellness, I think healthcare is a huge uncharted front.
Yeah.
Learning more about your biometrics, your body, what's going on at any point in time. So I think we're going to see some very fascinating things emerge there, especially with all the wearables becoming so hot.
I agree.
Nike Fit,
I
that
agree.
kind of
We're
thing.
seeing it a lot. Yeah. Well, great. I think is it time for Q&A, or do we have time for one more? No. Okay, good. So I wanted to just go down the line here and then just give each of you, a minute or so to talk about to summarize your thoughts about what advice, and then we're going to have a lightning round at the end of the Q&A section. Well, I'll just shoot you some questions. But right now, just before we go to Q&A, what thoughts do you have about, what advice would you give either to aspiring designers or, your choice, to companies that are aspiring to become design-centric? What one thing can they do to up their game in terms of being a design-centric company that's centered around producing great products, not just shipping on time with 0 defects or a low number of defects sort of thing, but great?
I think there's no more exciting time to be a designer than now. It's incredibly well sought after skill. These kids that are coming out of school are getting multiple offers. And one of the things that we're seeing in the transition now that we do have a seat at the table, and this is considered a critical function, is helping designers who are really good at designing, but maybe are not as good at having a voice. And when you're there at the table and you have product management and engineering, using your voice and having your opinion, not just being there to take orders and deliver great design, but to really influence the business. And that's where we are right now. Design really has the ability to influence and drive the business. So I think it's a very exciting time for people in this field.
Yeah. Steve?
I think that you need an incredibly crisp common goal. You just have to make sure that you articulate that goal and that everybody is bought into it. It's that bought into it part that's the most important. Like I'll say, oh yeah, we're going to take that hill. Everyone kind of nods and smiles. But if you don't believe it, if you don't feel it, if you're not bought into it, it's going to fall apart. You need to really make sure that everybody understands what your mission is, what the objectives are, and who it's for. And I think that once you do that, everyone's on board, and it just works. I've never in my life seen anyone come to work and say, I'm going to be a jerk today. Like, maybe somebody, but no one I've ever met, right? Most people don't do that. They have all the best intentions on the planet. But then what happens is that they're working against the goal because they never believed in it. And when you kind of sit down with them and you have a conversation, you realize they never really bought into it. I think the single most important thing any company can do, large or small, what is our goal? Do we all believe? People that don't believe, help them go someplace to where they'll believe. It's not a negative thing, it's just you're not on the team. People that do believe, make sure that you give them as much bandwidth and autonomy as humanly possible to execute. You'll do amazing things.
Does that mission have to come from the CEO?
No, not at all. It can be grassroots. It can come from anybody in the company as long as everybody rallies around that goal.
Huh. Frederik?
I absolutely agree with both of your points. I think a mission is definitely what matters. The other advice I want to highlight is that actually building multidisciplinary teams. So not just like look at designers and engineers, but look at like all other functions you have in the company and bring those people together. I think that's, again, like where the magic happens, if you have those different talents and backgrounds coming together, working on something they're really excited about, which is part of the mission. And then actually what's really interesting, you can develop a designer mindset with all people together so that you can actually give the tools and the skills to those people as well to have like a designer mindset and a designer approach. So people in finance, legal, and HR, and in all other functions, they can develop this designer's mindset really quickly. And that's something really powerful because then like the multidisciplinary teams instantly speak the same language. And that's what you want to have. Then put them in a special place. You're going to see some really interesting things happening.
Larry?
Yeah, I agree with it all. I pity Charles, but there won't be anything left to say. But he'll come up with a lot. It's also important to, in a way, have multidisciplinary people, and in addition to the teams. And in particular, the question is always going to be, who runs a multidisciplinary team? And sometimes there's a power struggle. Engineering manager thinks, well, I'm supposed to run that. I'm getting the product built. And the product management head says, I need to run that team. I'm responsible for the product. And what they never think about is maybe the designer should run that team because that designer has been in the company longer than any of us and knows this product really well and has a good track record of getting good products out the door. So one thing that I encourage people to do who are in design is if they're complaining that the organization is stupid, then I would say, you should run it. If you really think that, you should run it. You say, well, I don't know anything about product management. I say, you don't go to school to learn product management. You learn it on the job. And they should take a career path that brings them in a position where they could manage what normally product managers manage, these multidisciplinary teams. And it'll be good for everybody. Design will get more, will have more impact if some designers are leading these teams. It won't always be a designer, but sometimes. And other functions will learn from the designers who run the teams what other things there are to bring to the table than they've been bringing to the table. Because designers have some extra tools in their chest.
Yeah, and that's maybe quickly two things. First is help your designers learn some leadership skills, right? That I think often we sort of have a learned helplessness having been in this kind of other state for a while. And I mean, just to answer the question, how do you up-level your product? So even if you're making a router or a compression algorithm, there's functional value in that, but you also have, you need some to make it meaningful and have emotional value. Even a compression algorithm enables some kind of emotional thing somewhere in its life. And that's what your designers can bring. All of your products need to be meaningful, right? Not just functional. right? And this is the part of a product's meaning that your designer can help you create, and your researchers and your prototypers.
That's an excellent point. I mean, I remember we had a big emotional debate about which compression algorithm to use for real-time
Sure.
packet compression. Yeah, and engineers get very emotional about this stuff.
Sure
I mean, it
they
may
do.
not even be comprehensible to the end user, but there is a lot of content behind these decisions, even every engineering decision. That's excellent. So I'd like to open it up now for audience questions. We have microphones on the back of the room and in the front of the room, and we will alternate sides.
Thank you very much. I had a quick question as I'm experiencing or looking into the realm of startup. What I wish to hear, and I didn't notice if there was any mention, was that, so you're talking to a startup company with a great product, let's say it's enterprise market directed, but when and where and how much investment should go to the design? So when they start with the product, there's not much attention, it's just make it work, get it out of the house, we have the market, we have the enterprise client lined up, and then we need to just expand the market. But where would you recommend that bringing that design into product development for companies who will have a great future, but the traditional way of let's get the product out and then we'll worry about it later?
I think those days are kind of over. I think it's all of it until you really know there are many possible customers for the thing that you've faked, right? And that's, again, what design can do.
I think day one, you want to
Right.
have a designer day one.
Yep.
And we, at Citrix, we have a startup accelerator, and one of the things that we do is we go over and train those small startup teams on design and the value of investing in design from day one. And a lot of these companies are in the enterprise space, and we're saying this is not just for people who are developing consumer products.
Right.
If you're in the enterprise space, you need to be focused on this as well. It's critical.
I agree. We see that time and time again, that people's minimal expectations for product quality are sky high, above what they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and you can't not have a design-led product, even in the enterprise space, even in like the IT-facing space,
Absolutely.
because of the demographics of the workforce, right? So the people in the workforce, coming into the workforce right now, even in IT positions, people working on those routers and switches and compression algorithms and things like that, their expectations are set by Facebook and Google and Apple and LinkedIn and the tools they use every day. So you can't ignore it. It's not a nice to have anymore.
Yeah, I'll be really quick on this.
Yeah.
You want to treat people the way that you want to be treated. There is nothing in your home that you would be satisfied with that someone just put it out there. Nothing. You would be appalled to find out that something that you sat on was just put out there and you sit on it and it breaks. You'd be like, well, why didn't they pay attention to that? So we should never do that to our customers if we wouldn't allow it to be done to ourselves.
Yeah. Next question? Yes.
I'm a designer. I've run design teams at consumer electronics companies, and also I've been at a lot of startups where I've been, one-man shop. One of the interesting things that I've heard you talk about integrating design into the development process, I heard things like, oh, those crazy designers, all those, wildly creative people who have strange haircuts. What I've started doing the last few years, and I'm interested in getting your feedback, is I use a dirty word with design. I start talking about process, and it makes my designers really nervous, and it makes the developers really nervous, because what I do is I try to make design a deliverable as much as any line of code. And I try to say, if you're going to write, Mr. Developer, Ms. Developer, a line of code, you're assigned a schedule and a time and a place where that has to be ready to go. My design supporting that also has to be fitted into that schedule. So it makes my designers nervous, it makes the developers nervous because they have to plan up front. And yet what I found is it buys me the time to do the design in time to get it implemented. So I'm just curious about the notion of process and other sort of process things that you might apply to the wild and crazy people.
I've got strong opinions about
quickly,
this, but let's, yeah, go ahead, Charles.
That is all designers have is process. Right. That's all.
Could you tell me the number of my managers?
Yeah,
There's
Steve,
more words there, right?
Yeah.
I said I'd be brief.
Yeah, anyone else?
I agree. If you're a small, scrappy startup with 3 people, you probably don't need it. If you're a much larger company, yeah, you don't put in process for process's sake, but there are certain areas where it really can help you along and make sure that there are those milestones and that everybody's charted on that same course. It goes back to starting with a shared goal and vision. And if you have some milestones to help you check back on that shared, goal and vision, I think that's a good thing.
I just think process is a way to ensure quality. That's all, right? I mean, so, when people hear process, they immediately think of, like, I don't know, something from SAP. Anyone in here from SAP?
Probably.
Damn! I don't mean yours. But the rest of us, I think that's what people think of, right? Or they think of like a tax form when you say process. Process is very simple. We're going to put some goals and some guidelines and some bumpers around this so the damn thing doesn't blow up. So I think it makes perfect sense. I'm not afraid of that word.
Yeah.
Do you happen to have a better word? Because every time I use process, everybody gets, like I said, very nervous. And I've been trying to find a different way of explaining that.
No, a scientist is defined by the scientific method, right? I think a designer is defined by the design process. And even, I think Catherine's talking about it like a documented, written down kind of milestone thing. But even if we're not doing that, we're using the process in our heads, right? And we are experts in a process. That is all we have.
I think what makes people nervous is when you're asking them to be creative on a schedule, right? And it doesn't just apply to designers, it applies to architects too, right? And I think that setting up reasonable goals that we're going to have our high-level architecture in place by this date, we're going to have our high-level architecture, we're going to select among the alternatives we generated on this date, and then we're going to have this workshop on that date. Those are very achievable goals. So I think the key, though, is to realize you're not going to get it perfect the first time, and have your process allow for iterations and successive refinement, right? That if you have a process that we're going to have a perfect product, we're going to have our design complete, and we're never going to revisit it by next Friday, everyone's going to panic, and you're not going to get a good result, I think. So it's got to allow for iteration.
I mean, I'll give you just one really important, simple thing that I think process-wise we can all practice better, is to understand there's 2 really different modes of creation, being creative. And Frederik's an expert on this, but there's kind of a divergent, brainstormy, blue sky, and then there's a judgmental, curating, ranking, stack ranking. And those are different cognitive functions. And designers know when they're in either, and they know how to communicate with other people and bring them along. And the rest of us, when I'm not wearing my designer hat, we tend to interlace them, which is incredibly inefficient. So when we talk about process, it's often as simple as that. Does that resonate with you guys?
Yeah, so you said, do I have a different word? I do, and it's kind of cheesy, because I'm thinking about my 9-year-old son. It's just house rules. I mean, it's just that simple, right? Like when his friends come by, here's the house rules. Everyone puts their own dishes in the sink, and, right? And it sounds really kind of immature, but if you think about it, that's a process. It's a process of which you have to play if you're gonna tear apart my house like you do every Saturday night. Another thing, though, is that I think that you also need to be really critical and just transparent with your staff about if you have a whole bunch of whining babies. I'm just being deadly serious. And if you have a whole bunch of people that are like, I don't want process, and they put on their hoodie and they hop on their Vespa and they scoot away, I think that may not be the type of people that you're looking for in order to execute against your goals. You need a certain maturity level to understand that there are house rules. I'm going to give you lots of autonomy, but at the end of the day, there are some rules.
And also, I think process, it's often understood, like you were talking about, like a workflow, right?
Yeah.
But I think a more general definition of process is what we were talking about earlier is lean, right? That you don't like MVP, you had a different term that was better.
Minimal quality product.
Yeah, minimum quality product. And you learn from it, and you iterate, and you iterate, and you iterate. And I think every designer, our designers certainly are very, very comfortable with a learning system, right?
Yeah.
But there are dates, there are schedules, there's disciplined deliverables, that are well defined, and I consider that a process, right?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Every function in every company has a process, pretty much, especially large companies. And the problem, do people know what the word synchro mesh means? Oh boy, okay.
I've heard of it, but it's
I'm showing my age. When you operated a clutch, and the engine had to slow down, transmission had to speed up, whatever, there was a device called the synchro mesh that made that work. In a company, when there's processes in all these different departments, somebody has to do synchro mesh and get them to line up. And I remember when I was at Apple in the old days, manufacturing quickly developed a process and became traditional manufacturing, which is, here's our process, rest of the company has to live with it. And engineering was also, okay, here's our process, and product management, here's our process. Everybody's got a different process, and they don't really exactly line up anywhere, and so things don't work right. You need an integrated process, and you can't be stubborn and say, my process is, it's worked for 30 years, it's going to be the only way we do things. There are some things that have to be done for safety, compliance reasons, things like that. But there are a lot of things that are just inexplicable that creep into processes.
Great. Next question.
Yes, my name is Pferdt Hashemi. I work for Nikon Research, and I come to this forum more from a hardware perspective than software. And we have short memories, so history repeats itself. There were companies that made products as good as Apple's hardware. Some of this magnesium Sony Vaios in the late 90s, some of the products in the 80s. But I think there's a challenge with hardware that maybe software doesn't have. The cost for great design is not just upfront, but it is in your manufacturing as well. Do you have some advice on how to do what Apple does great, which is to market it, to make the customer realize the value? And do you have experiences where your design teams collaborate with your marketing teams? How do you do that on an organizational level to be able to actually have the customer understand the value and to pay more for it?
Understand the value of the hardware? Or?
To understand the value of the greater design, because with hardware, the cost is not just upfront. It's incremental as you go forward.
I don't know if you have to make people understand the value of the greater design. I mean, I think the automotive industry has revolutionized, has made a massive turnaround recently with realizing people like pretty cars. I mean, wow, go figure. Right? It's like, make the car prettier and people like it. And Honda Civic sales went up with the redesign. Audi has come out of nowhere and just done a phenomenal job at reinventing themselves. Even the new Volkswagen Beetle, right? It came back with a vengeance because you saw it and you went, hey, that's actually not that bad. Now, I'm not quite sure if the manufacturing costs went up because bending a piece of metal doesn't really cost all that much more if it's like this or like that. It's just the CAD file needs to be beautiful. It needs to be something that really kind of makes people say, I want to touch that. As far as advice goes, I would say, again, know who your user is, right? Know who you're designing for. I think that if you just do even some psychographic research on who you want to build for, you identify the 3 to 5 things that are very emotional to them, and make sure that they see that in your product. So the second they see it, they say, I see what's in it for me. But trying to convince me to buy something that's got nothing in it for me, it's a waste of my time. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, Catherine actually made a really good point earlier along that line that I'll let you speak for yourself. But when I reiterate this there used to be pretty much 10 years ago, 5 years ago, used to be kind of a two-legged stool between product marketing and engineering. Where design was not really part of the conversation. It wasn't even considered. Now it's becoming a three-legged stool where you still have design, which has the creative perspective, what could be developed. You have engineering, which is the pragmatic perspective, is here's how we'll do it and here's when you'll get it. And then you have product marketing, which has the business perspective. Can we sell it? How much money can we make from it? How can we, what can we price it at? How do we position it in the market? Who's our competition? I don't think you can do without any of those three. Yeah. Did you want to?
No, I absolutely agree. You articulated that well. With your point, when it comes to hardware, if that increased cost in materials results in a better experience, it's the experience that you highlight. And if people see the value of that experience, like we've used Apple as the example, then they're willing to pay more for it because they understand how that's going to create additional value for them.
Yeah. Last thing on this point, especially with marketing, I said earlier that we flip the org chart around a lot. All the marketing designers are part of the design team at LinkedIn. It just kind of made sense because if you're going to be marketing the product, you should probably have access to the same files, the same discipline, the same heart and soul as the people that are building the product. So we just meshed them all together. When Julie, who's sitting right there, when she and I worked at Adobe, we would work our butts off on a version of Photoshop, and the marketing team would market Photoshop, and we're like, it doesn't do that, right? And it wasn't their fault. It's because I think that from what they read, they interpreted that it did that, or from some demo of a feature that we showed them that we didn't end up building, they thought it did that. But they weren't integrated, they weren't communicating. So it was one of the things that when I went to LI, I said, well, let's just make sure that those people are always communicating because they're sharing the same file. And that allowed it to be a lot easier to market the product.
Okay.
At least some companies have a design language that runs across the gamut from the products, the product documentation, the marketing materials, the office space they're in. It can get pretty extreme. And having a design language like that, it goes back to what everyone else has been saying.
Yeah.
It's a tool to bring together those disparate parts of the company and look like one company to the customer.
Well, let me give you a life lesson. If you buy a design company, we have our own font, right? We have our own iconography. We have our own color scheme. It's like, be aware of what you're getting if you buy a design company and let them, reach their full potential. So, yeah. Next question.
Hi, my name is Randy. A quick question around, you guys have mentioned design thinking quite a bit, and design thinking, there's been a lot written about it. It's being taught to our kids in schools now. What thoughts do you have on integrating design thinking into other parts of the organization? You guys talk a lot about product today, but like things like finance and operations and HR, in solving problems in those spaces, it seems like this applies as well. Do you have any thoughts on how to get people thinking along those lines in those other parts of the organization?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on this one. This is one that we've really embraced. One of our company-wide imperatives is for everybody in the company to embrace design thinking in everything they do. In fact, we have a leadership blueprint, and design-driven at the end of the year is one of the things that every single person at our company needs to measure themselves against. So it's part of our charter to make sure that people, when they see that, they know what that means. And for us, design thinking doesn't mean you're in Photoshop moving pixels around. It means that you understand who your customer is. And to the point of HR or finance, initially when we started this, we'd say, who's your customer? And they go, I don't have anything to do with the customer. We'd say, no, your customer is the employee. And design thinking means you understand who your customer is and what their needs are, and that you're trying to serve them in the best way possible. So we have a business design team that is working with different parts of the organization to help them optimize the things that they're doing for our employees, for our partners, or for our customers. So we think it's a critical part in helping us be successful.
I think you're mentioning something interesting, which is that we teach design thinking now to kids. I think kids can actually teach us design thinking even more. Specifically around one skill, which is asking why. I have a 4-year-old. I really understand what the question means on a daily basis. So I hear about 25 to 30 whys in 1 hour. So that's actually some really interesting things we can actually learn from kids, and also this childlike behavior, which is not childish, but being childlike, and play around with different things to really learn fast. I think that's what the two skills which are tremendously important for design teams and teams overall are. And that connects also to your process questions before. I think design thinking is an interesting process which actually helps to create this language between teams. so that you can agree on a couple of principles which are coming from design thinking, user-centered design, and then teams can actually create really something magical together. We at Google, we have, or I'm identifying 3 principles which are really aligned with what I'm teaching at Stanford at the D School as well, which is the first one, which is focus on the user. So understanding and knowing your user is really what is kind of like the starting point of design thinking, using empathy and those techniques to really put yourself into the shoes of a user and understand how they see the world, basically. The second principle is around generating ideas, and we call that 10x thinking, to actually build or come up with ideas which are 10 times better than your current solution. The third principle, which is really something close to my heart as well, it's around being prototype driven. So really using prototyping and as an approach to really learn fast what's working and what's not working. And I think those 3 principles really are part of a process if you want. And if you apply those 3 principles and give them to teams, it's really something where engineers can talk to designers, but also other functions like finance and HR and legal are really stepping into the game and really agree on those 3 principles or the process and create something interesting together.
I think that's an excellent point, and I would kind of add to that childlike thinking, fearlessness, not the willingness to look stupid. You know, like with working with Steve Jobs, for example, he would not be afraid to ask, why can't X do Y? Why can't I copy on one device and paste on another device? And we're like, what? Of course you can't copy on one device. But asking the question, why can't I do something, right, is stimulates so much creative thinking, even if you don't solve that particular problem. So, but Steve was never afraid to appear stupid, because if you thought he was, he'd fire you, right? You know, so it's, but I think the rest of us need to cultivate that so that we can act like kids, right? I mean, and ask those questions. We have time for one more question. Yes?
So I'm a designer, but I manage developers. And so I have a question. How do you balance the technologies industry's habit of telling a better story, giving a better demo than we're able to, when we finally ship, deliver? And I think that tension is common in startups, but it's also common in our bigger companies. As we demo things earlier, we tell great stories about them, but we don't always end up shipping something that lives up to the stories we've created. I think Steve touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious how other people address it.
It's a great question. I mean, discipline, I think, really is part of it. And to the point you made, I think the better connection you can have between marketing and product, the better alignment, making sure people have a shared vision, that helps tremendously as well. But a lot of it really is discipline.
Yeah. Knowing the difference between a demo and a prototype and what they're for, they can get very mixed up with hilarious results.
Okay, so okay, we can take one more quick question before we go to the lightning round. Yes, please.
Hi, my question is about habit-forming design. I was wondering, in your process, how much are you thinking about your products, either software or hardware, you want to create that habit-forming usage, which I think today is very much in practice, especially with the number of users you want to get to.
We call it re-engagement.
Right.
But it's addiction, yeah.
There's some
Is there an anonymous program for Salesforce Anonymous? Yeah.
LinkedIn does a lot of this stuff, like endorse. Anybody in LinkedIn seen the endorse?
Yeah, I know.
You just sit there endorsing and endorsing and endorsing.
Yeah.
And where did the day go?
This is terrible. Yeah.
Or,
yeah, I know. Oh.
Or maybe you know one of these people, and it's an infinite scroll. It's infinite.
Yeah.
What did you do?
Oh, yeah, I haven't thought about him in 20 years. Yeah. That's
Steven,
terrible.
It's awesome.
Terrible.
It's awesome.
Okay, so one. We ratcheted back endorse because of that, and no, honestly, because I think that Larry makes a great point, and the habit-forming part was we put nicotine in it, but the problem was, and where I really want to support what Larry's saying is, it had no value. right? Like you could endorse people all day long, but what was the return on that action? And that was one of the things that we had to weigh. And it was a really good opportunity for us to fail fast, because what Jeff said was, he said, this thing is off the charts as far as the numbers, but what's the value? And he took the team to task and said, you have in fact created something that has massive viral impact, but has no nutritional value whatsoever. So I want you guys to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to make it more valuable. And that's why we ratcheted, it back down. So I think if you want to create viral loops, it needs value, right? I tend to do things over and over again that I find valuable. I mean, it's just that simple, with the exception of Angry Birds. But honestly, the more that you can give people a sense of, I'm moving forward because, and here's the return on my investment, here's the return on my time, and I find value in that, that's the best viral loop you can create. Don't create crack, it's bad.
Fantastic. So I think we'll go to our lightning round questions and then wrap up. So for the lightning round, what I'd like is, we'll just go down the line here. And please, we'll start with you. Well, we'll mix it up. But please take about 20 seconds or so to respond to the question about who or what do you look to for inspiration?
Who or what do I look to for inspiration? A variety of things. Interestingly enough, sports. I look at teams and how teams work with one another. I look at high-performance athletes, not just what they're doing, but their equipment. And I think there's a whole variety of inspiration for me personally that comes from sports and the technology and the gear and the perseverance and the training.
Oh, excellent.
Tweens and pop stars. And I said tweens and pop stars, and I'm not tweens.
Tweens.
Yeah. So I think what's that? It's 12 to 14.
Huh.
Yeah. Anything pop culture and pop stars. And the reason is, I'm a firm believer that life imitates art, and if you can really kind of get into that genre of what kids are thinking is really cool, really fast, really creative, you can kind of anticipate what's next. The most influential movie in my life was Star Wars. Like to this day, I'm a 70s baby, I'm an 80s kid. To this day, I'm like, hey, how can we do something like? And it's very much reminiscent of when I was that age, and I was really inspired.
Frederik.
I actually go before that, looking at kindergarten kids. That's where my inspiration comes from. Not just visiting a lot of kindergartens and bringing my own 4-year-old into kindergarten, but actually those mindsets of kids are really, I think, something important which you can bring into organizations as well. That's why we just created another kid. I now have a 5 weeks old, so to hopefully get even more inspiration. So we just continue that route, I guess.
Larry?
I get a lot out of corny stuff, just reading. People write this sort of one-page story about some tragedy in their life that got turned around, or how they turned themselves around, or how they ruined themselves, or even. But just somebody's self-portrait, one-pager kind of thing. I love reading those things, and they get me thinking about stuff I wasn't thinking about.
The bios. Huh?
That's cool. Yeah, I love that. I love, transformation is kind of what we try to do with products. So I'm totally there with Larry. For me, it's my guilty pleasure is science fiction movies. Yeah. Her, everybody should see Her.
Yeah.
And Korean UI design right now is off the hook. It's crazy. They're doing in games and social software. Super fun, really they've just broken all the rules we just told you about, and it's awesome.
North or south?
South.
Good. Okay, they're breaking a lot of rules in the north too, but not another. Okay, so other than your own company, and we'll start with you this time, Charles, and move back this way. Other than your own company and Apple, take them off the table, which company do you think is doing the most interesting work right now? You mentioned South Korea, but...
Oh, wow. Neighbors, pretty good. The South Korean search company is doing all sorts of interesting stuff. They're up a line, I think. It's just, my eyes hurt, and I love it, and I don't know why. Most interesting company... It might have to come back to me. There's so many right now.
Too late, too late.
All
Lightning,
right.
yeah. Right.
Neighbor, then. Throw that out there.
But South Korea, well, okay. And the search company. Larry?
No, really, I want to pass too on that one. It's a tough one because they change. The mantle sort of moves from one company to another. Someone will do some really creative iPhone or Android app. But then, 6 months later, it's just the same, and somebody else has got something more interesting.
Well, recent past then.
Oh, recent past. Well, LinkedIn, I'll put,
Okay.
after giving them hell about infinite scrolls. There is a lot of creativity there.
Yeah. Yeah, Frederik? Other than your own company?
I would probably not pick a company or organization. I would probably pick schools. I think schools are now in an interesting position to really redefine themselves or redesign themselves in that sense. I think we have an interesting area where they have to focus more on the user, which are children or students. So I think we can have like some interesting outcomes in the next couple of years out from schools and how they actually redesign themselves.
Excellent. Yeah. Steve?
The benefit to going forth is I had time to think about this. So, one of them is Sina Weibo in China. I think that they're doing amazing work. And they know exactly who they're designing for, and it's just working brilliantly. Other one is actually Audi, believe it or not. Audi's new navigation system in the main console of the car, the actual dash, is it's a super high resolution TFT display, the whole thing. So depending on your driving conditions, the dash changes. Just kind of makes sense. So when you turn on the navigation, the dash changes, and now it's a huge turn-by-turn arrow, but it's right there within the driver's view. You're not doing this. You're paying attention to that, and there's just something so intelligent. And when you take a look at it, you're like, of course you should do that. But they're the first car company to really kind of innovate with just putting computer screens right there in the driver's view. I just think it's magnificent.
Catherine, last time we had to wrap it up, we're getting the hook.
I would say Tesla, and not just because the latest car is beautiful and compelling, but they're looking at transportation as a whole, and it's such an area that is long overdue that we need to look at different ways to transport people.
Excellent point. Well, thank you for a wonderful panel. I think you'll agree. It's amazing people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives so freely and candidly. We really appreciate it. I hope that everybody got a lot out of this tonight, and thank you so much for guiding the discussion so well. As a small token of our appreciation we have for you, the extremely well-designed Churchill Club speaker T-shirt. Like to thank our partners, GlobalLogic and Weber Shandwick, and a recording of this video should be available even as early as tomorrow, hopefully, on our YouTube channel, where you can also find recordings of most of our other programs. And you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you soon.